Hello and welcome to another edition of the Type 10. I'm Zane Donani. Let's get into it. We had a lot of news that broke or that I found over the weekend, over 4th of July weekend, trying to break down everything for you guys. Let's start from the top where we left off last time. Denver wants Jalen Waddle to take short and intermediate plays, the distance. There are very few times a young QB gains a talent like Jalen Waddle, really good player, and doesn't improve. I'm very excited about Jalen Waddle. You guys know this is probably one of my flag plants at this moment in time. Obviously, everything is based off of a player that based off of where the price is for a player. But I do think that this is one of the few receivers that goes past like round 2 that could be a round 2 value or above in 2027. So very excited for Jalen Waddle and what he can bring to that Denver Broncos offense. I'm going to do a quick thing here for myself, but yeah, I've received a lot of DMs from professionals, from fans, all sorts of stuff. I am responding to every single person. I don't care if you have 1 follower, 0 followers, if you have 100,000 followers. My goal here is to remain free for all of this stuff that I'm doing, and just be genuine for any person that wants to reach out and chat and talk ball. I actually had somebody reach out and ask about financial things too, which was fun. Yeah, here's proof. I was talking to a random person. We were talking about a startup dynasty league. In this article, we had from Raiders Wire, we had a little bit of nuance about Jalen Naylor, and they're kind of viewing him as their wide receiver 2 at worst. Obviously, they paid him. They have Trey Tucker, they have Jack Besh, they have Dante Thornton and Malik Benson, and that kind of seems like their top 5 at least. And I don't actually think that they're going to bring in any other receivers. Just all reports that I've read are that they want to work on their young receivers right now. He's going to be asked to step up and be at least the Raiders' number 2 wide receiver after being the number 3 in Minnesota. So again, he's going to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets, which I think that we'll see a lot of from the Raiders this season. Ashton Dulin is the wide receiver 3 for the Colts. This was awesome. So I started digging deeper and deeper, and this is the second confirmation of what James Cook's role is in the offense and what might change. And all we're hearing is basically that, one, Pete Carmichael is having some influence in what the Bills system is going to look like. And that influence is that he wants to put James Cook in more of an Alvin Kamara style role, where he does a lot more of the receiving game stuff instead of Ty Johnson. And then Ray Davis is kind of locked in as that RB2. We have more on that later, but there was another mention from 32 beat writers where they did an interview with Matt Perino going over this, and he also mentioned the same thing. And then there was a big report that came out from a different resource. Some feedback from fans. I'm excited about that. Some more discussion about Jaden Blue. So he did not learn the playbook last year. And I recall like reading some of the articles where it was like, hey, this guy showed up to practice in like Louis Vuitton cleats and he had blisters, and Shoddy was like, why are you sitting out of practice? And he was like, I've got blisters. And they were, he made fun of him for wearing the cleats that were like not assigned to him or whatever. And it sounds like that's been an issue dating back to high school and college. But this offseason, Shoddy's talked really highly of Jaden Blue, that he's, kind of come back as a different person. And they're willing to give him another shot, and that he could be a complimentary back to Javonte Williams, which I expect him to do as long as he keeps his head on straight. So it sounds like Brevin Spanford is the tight end 2 for the Cowboys. I'm very excited about that. I think he has a lot of potential actually in the pass game in the future, potential dynasty ad, but he's an elite blocker. So kind of like a Charlie Kolar situation there. Parker Washington, John Shipley in this article had a bunch of different quotes that he wrote that were like, okay, this guy has production that's due to explode. He's a central piece of the offense. He's a special weapon. All of those types of words are not used for like an ordinary player. So I just keep like piecemealing things together. Obviously, there's some confirmation bias. Like I like him. I think he was a great player last year. But I'm really excited for the prospects of what he can be in 2026 and beyond. I think that extension is coming. We hadn't heard that much on Harold Vannon in the past, so he was seen catching balls from Deshaun Watson during recent workouts in Cleveland. Again, I think that's a positive step. He was out with a groin injury that he suffered like late last year. He missed part of OTA, or he missed all of OTAs and minicamp. But it's good to hear that he's back out there doing stuff. It sounds like he should be fine for training camp. The Jaguars' top 25 skill players that were non QBs and kind of like their rank order of how impactful they will be for the Jaguars. Brenton Strange, number 4, Travis Hunter, number 5, but mostly for cornerback. Number 7, Brian Thomas. I mentioned this in a future post or comment that I think that I agree that Brian Thomas is more important to their offense than Parker Washington. That doesn't mean that he's going to have bigger stats. I think that his role in being that deep threat and driving the defense back and building room for Parker Washington and Brenton Strange and Jacoby Myers and even the running game is really important. Number 9, Parker Washington. Number 11, Bashal Tutin. Number 13, Jacoby Myers. Number 15, Chris Rodriguez. On Zachariah Branch from Will McFadden. Actually, Will McFadden ended up following me after this. I'm very excited about that. I would love to chat with you, Will. On Zachariah Branch, Branch got the opportunity to show what he offers his new team and get his first taste of NFL game during organized team activities and mandatory minicamp. In those practices, Branch was a big part of the wide receiver rotation and worked with the kickoff and punt returners. He has a chance to make an early impact if he ramps well. There's some early season usage that I see coming for him on design targets, like kind of like a Kadarius Toney type of role where it's like, hey, in his rookie year, they just kind of like threw him screens and let him like kind of go to work. And then potentially as the season goes on, as he gets more familiar with the route tree, a lot of his role in college was kind of just like design targets anyway. So like he has a lot of work to do as a receiver, but he can still be beneficial in fantasy by just, catching those PPR like screens and stuff like that. Especially for best ball. Redraft, I mean, you got to take chances and maybe he surprises us. So you never know. But I do think he'll have a role for this team. There's clearly an opportunity to be in 2 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets, things like that. Listen to this Ravens podcast, but the team really believes in Rashad Bateman as a bounce back candidate. He's their clear wide receiver 2. I think people are skeptical. The idea of Rashad Bateman is worse than what he actually is as a player. I think he's actually a pretty good player. Maybe not the best fit with Lamar per se, but he's always done pretty well in separation metrics. So I think that there's opportunity for him to do stuff. You could do worse things with your last round pick. The issue with him has really been injuries. And then, he's not he hasn't been 1,000-yard receiver and he was a first round pick. So it's more like versus expectations, people are not as happy with his production. But I think that he's a solid receiver. I'd love to see him in a different scheme with a different quarterback and different things like that. I think he could produce on a different team, especially in a McShanahan offense. Zay Flowers is going to get extended probably before the season. Seems like Devontae Walker is probably the favorite for wide receiver 3 right now. They're going to do more 3 wide receiver sets this season. On Tyrone Tracy, they said, this is from The Athletic, they said he's option 2 in a backfield committee. I don't think it'll be too much of a committee. I think it's going to be Scatterbo doing like most of the receiving work, most of the goal line work, and then a lot of the between the 20s work too. So I'm not like too into Tracy, but I do think there's a high chance that our man Scatterbo gets injured again, just given the way he plays. Isaiah Likely, opportunity should increase above his 60 targets last year. Likely should have an ample opportunity to be the number two option in the offense. This is from The Athletic. I think the last comment was from me and not necessarily from the article. Like, people are arguing about this. Like, he's not the best blocker yet. That doesn't mean he can't develop into that. That he isn't developed into that. Like for this year specifically. I don't think the Giants have many options. I think he has to be out there a lot. The theoretical max that I did research on was that Arthur Smith's offense with the Falcons, I think in 2023, did two plus tight ends on the field for roughly 70% of their pass plays. So that would be like the theoretical max if you're thinking about like if Isaiah Likely never plays inline tight end, which he will. So that means like roughly a 70% route share for Isaiah Likely. I think he'll get more than that, and if he does get more than that, he is probably a pretty good pick at his ADP. I don't think he's like the most talented guy in the world, but if you're asking me, can he get 800 yards receiving and like 6 touchdowns? Yes, and that's a smash at like 133 ADP or whatever he's at right now. We like to hear like 1,000 yards or whatever, but tight ends don't score that much, so it's that would be a good production from him. A little bit more confirmation of the personnel that the Giants will deploy. Calvin Austin is the starting slot, but that position won't be featured as much in this offense. So again, I keep thinking about this. I think this is going to be Isaiah Likely playing that slot role, sometimes in line. He's going to play a lot. So a puff piece on Mike Evans. At OTAs, Shanny made the point to say some stuff along these lines. But if someone as accomplished as Mike Evans is going this hard at this time of the year, which was in OTAs, then we should all meet that standard. And, that just goes to show you like why Mike Evans has had the career that he has. People are worried about the substration stuff, and I think that's legit. But when he's healthy, I expect him to do really well in this offense. This will be the first time that he's been in a McShanahan offense. No, that's not true. Actually, Liam Cohen was there, and now they've had some other things. Regardless, my thought process on Mike Evans is that I think he's going to do really well with Brock Purdy. They haven't had this X wide receiver since Brandon Ayuk got injured. And I think it's a huge part of their offense, and it's going to raise the floor of their offense quite a bit. He just needs to stay healthy, and I think that's the question. He goes in front of Jalen Waddle right now in best ball. I would rather take Waddle, that's for sure, especially with like factoring in all of the risk with Mike Evans' injuries and stuff like that. So, but I do think he's like a fair value, and he kind of goes between Waddle and Luther Burden. I guess I would probably have those two guys above him, but at the same time, like I don't think he's a bad pick where he's going right now. So, and then Kittle was also saying that Evans is unstoppable in the red zone. So, I have not missed a DM. If you want to DM me, go ahead. I'm happy to chat. Mekhi Lemon updates from Jimmy Kempski, Eagles beat writer. He was performing as the starting slot in OTAs before he got hurt. He's going to play early. Should be good from the hamstring injury that he suffered, and should be fine for training camp. My thought process on him is that I just think they're going to be a little bit of a route share split. You're not going to see him get that 80% plus route share this year, in my opinion, unless Wicks gets injured. And even then, you might have Hollywood Brown play the outside receiver role instead of Mekhi Lemon. I don't really like taking Mekhi Lemon. I think he's a really solid talent. I think it's a bad fit with the Eagles. But at the same time, we've seen things work out where we didn't think things would go a certain way, and they do. It's just not the bet that I want to make. If I'm doing like a best ball portfolio, I would probably take my 2% and just get out of there. I don't like fading anybody that's in like the top 8 rounds or so, just because I think that pretty much anybody has the ability to have like a really strong spike week, and you never know who you actually need in that final week. But I'm not that interested in Mekhi Lemon this season. And then similar with Eli Stowers. So this was also interesting. I had debates with people online about this, but I think everything in this article was worth the read for Eli Stowers. But unlikely to play much in 2026. Needs a lot of work as a blocker. We knew that already. This is not anything new. He wasn't impressive in the spring. That matters to me a little bit because he's supposed to be good in shorts. That's kind of the role that he should be good in. So, um, obviously they said he's tight end 3. I don't really care about that because yeah, Johnny Bunt is more of a blocker, so whatever. They have a slot receiver in Mekhi Levin. They like Dontavian Wicks on the outside. They like Devonta Smith on the outside. Um, if there's injuries, does Eli Stowers get to enough of a route share, like 60% plus, to be a factor? I don't think so. I still don't think so. This is just not a guy that I want to take this season. I think that he has a really bright future because of some of the metrics that he's shown in the past, but it's just not the bet that I want to make this season. Seems like Tank Bigsby is the clear handcuff to Saquon, and Shipley is the clear RB3. Skylar Bell, he'll be in the mix for wide receiver 3. I think that's important. They're trying to see what they have in Josh Palmer and Keon Coleman, especially Keon Coleman. But it doesn't sound like things have ever really trended well for him there. I don't expect him to make any sort of big leap. So by mid-season, maybe you see Skylar Bell being that wide receiver 3. Doesn't mean he'll get the full route share because they've historically done a lot of rotating based off of what they need. But getting the opportunity is important. And then if he's a good player, then he'll be on the field. This was interesting. Tankdale actually responded to. So there's been people that have been using my tweets on Instagram, and Tankdale actually responded to this where I said like Jaden Higgins is the wide receiver 2, Noel's the wide receiver 3, and he said LMAO, which is fine. I don't like none of that bothers me at all. I think the big thing to me is that you know I really am just trying to say what the beat reporters are saying, and that's pretty much what my duty is here. And then I'm giving my own perspective a little bit here and there too. So, all of the reports have been pretty consistent about what's going on with Tank Dell being a mystery off of injury, uncertainty. Like they don't really know what they have in him. By all reports, like from doctors that like say stuff on Twitter, like his actual injury is difficult to come back from, very difficult. So we don't know. If he does get back to what he was like his rookie year, he'll be involved. He'll probably play a lot because he was really good, but we just don't know what's going to end up happening there. Happy 4th of July. This was fourth weekend. This was my son. It was really fun to spend time with him, training him to be the next best quarterback. If you like defensive stuff, sometimes I also tweet about that. Here's the big one. James Cook, from a report by Sal Capaccio, who covers the Buffalo Bills. He basically said he expects James Cook to be more involved in the pass game this season. This is the third source that has said this. So I said it earlier, Matt Perino. We had another Buffalo Rumblings report, which is like more of a fan blog, so I didn't trust that as much. And then this is one of the top insiders for the Bills as well, saying that. So I think this could lift James Cook's ceiling quite a bit. I would rank him above Jonathan Taylor, so right behind Christian McCaffrey. I think he's just a better pick than Jonathan Taylor. This offense is going to be good. If he's more involved in the pass game, then goodness gracious, he could end up as. I do think that he has the ceiling if he's involved in the pass game to be RB1 this season. That doesn't mean that he will be, but he has the chance. So very interesting. In that same report, there was some expectations on DJ Moore's target volume. So he said I expect like 110 to 120 targets this season to lead the team. Clear that he's going to play like pretty much an every down role. We'll see if his talent is still there. He also talked about Keon Coleman, Skylar Bell, Brandon Cooks, and Josh Palmer. Again, wide receiver 3 is wide open for the Bills. Todd Monken talked about Harold Van, and this was an old quote, but he basically compared him to Brock Bowers in terms of his ability. And there's some debate about that too, but that's okay. Aaron Wilson talked about Jaden Higgins' versatility in the slot and on the outside. Needs to work on chemistry with CJ Stroud. He mentioned Jalen Noel as a slot player. He's a key player, but always as slot. And then Tank Dell could be on a pitch count if healthy, though he should be ready for training camp. And then Xavier Hutchinson was mentioned as wide receiver 4, with the expectation that we don't know what Dell is at this point in time. I don't think Dell's a good pick right now until we see him out in training camp, hear a little bit more about what his like involvement looks like, how he's kind of trending, all sorts of different stuff. Patriots will probably sign a tight end 2 near training camp, so that's a little bit of a knock on Eli Raridan for this season at least. Some ranking by Paul Kaharski, the top insider for the Titans, on the wide receiver room for the Titans. Carnell Tate number 1, Wan'Dale Robinson number 2, and then 3 through 5 he said is just kind of like mix and match. We'll see what happens. But he had Calvin Ridley 3rd, Chimere DK as 4, and Alec Iomanor as 5. I'm worried about Calvin Ridley this season. I think he's also a bad pick because I don't think that he'll be the wide receiver 3 by the end of the season. There's another report on Parker Washington's extension, mentioning of Jaden Reed's contract as kind of like that baseline for him. Sigmund Bloom said he wants to rank James Cook ahead of Jonathan Taylor. Again, haven't missed a DM. Quint Allen, they're just envisioning him being more involved in the pass game this year than he was last year. I still think it's more of like a Dare Agumbawale equivalent type of role, but it's notable. We'll see what ends up happening there. Good soccer this weekend, by the way. And then we've got the U.S. game tonight, so I'm really excited about that. This Ross Tucker podcast, Eli Heidenreich was on the interview, and it just seems like the team really likes him. DK Metcalf gave him a nickname the team is adopting for him called Captain America. He's on the roster bubble. I think he's going to make it because I think that he's just based on personality. It sounds like he's the like grit and grind type of guy that's going to put like all the work in. And that's exactly the type of person that you want on your football team. He'll play special teams. Maybe in like a year or 2, he will eventually like excel in an actual role. Could surprise this year. Who knows? It doesn't seem like Jonathan Taylor will get traded. They actually mentioned in an article that I read, I don't know if it was this one or a different one, that they'll kind of like ride him into the ground this season, which I do expect given what their backup situation looks like. So I got this video of Roma Dunes running on the treadmill. It looks like he's running at roughly full speed. I'm not like tracking people's Instagrams. Some people like send me stuff, which is cool. And then I like to showcase it. But anyway, the new normal is you can't really tell from this video because he's running in a straight line. I think from everything, you would probably be able to understand what ends up happening with him based off of like how he looks when he's cutting. I'm still scared to take him. But I mean, his ADP has fallen a little bit, and I think he's just kind of in that range where like if you need a receiver, I don't think he's a terrible pick because he could have some big games. I'm worried about the Titans' offensive line. I've talked about that extensively on this pod in the past, but they have a couple of positions that are up for grabs, especially on the interior offensive line, and I'm pretty worried about that. This was interesting. I listened to this 2026 offensive plan for the Packers. So they ripped their playbook down to the studs, which we knew about from before because I think they had talked about this in an interview previously, but there's some belief that the Packers could go more pass heavy this season, put more on Jordan Love, especially with Josh Jacobs kind of showing a lot of wear and tear. Jordan Love's more experienced now. He exhibited pre-snap control and processing, capabilities last season. This is their words, not mine. Uh, and so they think there's a possibility that they may go more pass heavy this season, just given like how they've struggled in the past. And then on top of that, they believe that Matthew Golden kind of brings more upside to the offense, and so that's why they were okay moving on from Romeo Dubs. But Dubs had really strong chemistry with Love, especially in the red zone, and Matthew Golden needs to work on that. But they do think like field stretching abilities, separation, all sorts of different stuff. They really like Matthew Golden. In this Pewter Report podcast, they talked about like the unsung Bucks players, and Jalen McMillan was reported in that. They believe he could break out given defensive focus on Egbuka and Chris Godwin. I think he's a really strong separator from what he's shown in his first 2 seasons, and other people I've talked to also feel the same way. I'm pretty excited about him based on where he's going right now. I mean, if he rose a lot, like yeah, different bet, but right now I think he's a good pick. Keep reading that David Montgomery is going to be in a workhorse role, 3-down role. I've got more on this in a little bit. Raiders intel, they want to see how their young receivers develop. I'm not expecting anything, any sort of like free agent wide receiver addition or even a trade for Kayshon Boutte, just based on reports. Okay, this is interesting. Joe Mixon's role in 2024 basically was an elite bell cow. You don't see this very often, but basically he had 86.2% of the opportunity share, and that includes 2 games that he was kind of like ramping up from injury and ramping down from his workload as well. He had 7 games where he was over 90% opportunity share from the backfield. That is an elite role. If David Montgomery sees that role, his ADP is going to be smashed by a lot. Of course, there's injury concerns with David Montgomery, just given his age and taking on a big load. But if we're making upside bets, that's a good one. Sal Capaccio in that same interview was bullish on Kincaid this season. Believes that he'll be featured as long as he is healthy. I still want to see it before I believe it with Kincaid. Okay, TLDR on this Vikings report from insider Matt Collar, who has been an insider for the Vikings for quite some time. He basically called it Jordan Mason's backfield and that Aaron Jones is more of like a spell back and he will eat into pass downs. They want to limit Aaron Jones this season since he wore down in 2025. He also talked about Damon Claiborne and said like, yeah, if Jones got hurt, like you'd maybe see Claiborne take on some role, but doesn't believe that he's more than like not going to be more involved than like a like spell back ever really, given kind of his frame and stuff. So I just thought that was really interesting that they'll lean heavily on Jordan Mason on early downs is specifically what he said. I kind of see that pointing in the direction of like more of a 65-35 split. I think most people have been assuming that it would be like 50-50, maybe even Aaron Jones is RB1. I don't know, guys. It makes me feel like Jordan Mason's a good pick. I know we always think about like receiving upside for backs too. He talked about the receiving a little bit, and he was like, "I don't know who's going to be out there." Aaron Jones was pretty bad in pass blocking last year. Maybe we'll see some out of Jordan Mason. So, did mention Xavier Scott as well that he could be like the again. I keep talking about the Daria Gubawale role, but in that type of role. I don't see Brandon Ayuk going to the Commanders based off of all of the craziness that ended up happening this past weekend, where he basically like trolled Jaden Daniels. If you believe in that, like, there's no chance that he's going to that team. The other thing is that Aaron Jones was below expected in terms of his explosive run rate. When you start seeing guys in this area, you've got Kareem Hunt here, Isaiah Pacheco, Chuba Hubbard. That's when you start seeing guys like truly show a decline. Aaron Jones has typically been in this box or above the box. And so I'm very skeptical that he is going to be good this season. I talked about this, but I'm going to start tracking explosive rate over expected because I think it's a really good metric that's somewhat predictive of who are good fantasy players and good running backs in general. So I'm going to track that this season along with receiver score. The only other free agent veteran wide receiver that the Commanders have been linked to is Stephon Diggs. So I do believe that that is a potential thing that ends up happening soon. Diggs is clearly working out in at University of Maryland, which is very close to where the Commanders are. I think that's a possibility. Going to skip some more Brandon Ayuk stuff. I wrote about Diggs as a significant value in one of my latest articles that talked about like route depth and how that matters. I think Diggs is just an incredible pick right now. And I think that would be the case if he went anywhere, really. The only team that I would be skeptical on is if he went to Miami, because I just don't think that they'll have enough pass yards to really matter that much, and it limits his upside. But I think that he's a really good pick at the moment. Josh Downs, again, reading that he'll play more on the outside. We don't need to hear this very much more, but that's just what's going to end up happening. They want him to do that. And, I kind of want them to sign a guy like Keenan Allen because I would love for his ADP to drop more because everything that I read is even if they sign a guy like Keenan Allen, that they would still want him to play on the outside, that Keenan Allen would play more of a third down role. So I think that could be even a cheat code for Josh Downs. I think he's a great pick at ADP right now. He might be one of my flag plants as well as we get closer to the season, as we hear more about what's going on with the team. There was an article that talked about the Colts potentially adding a free agent veteran running back like Antonio Gibson. It doesn't say they're 100% in the market, but based off of Jonathan Taylor's injury history, he took a big load last year. There's a lot of ambiguity in that backfield, and they do have a history with this GM of adding veteran running backs as they get deeper into training camp. This is interesting. So last year, when Dobbins got hurt, the Broncos leaned heavier into the pass game. Their PROE went up by 3.5%. And then Bo Nix became more efficient as well. His completion rate over expected was higher. The team scored a little bit more in points per game. Their win percentage was slightly higher, though, it's roughly equivalent. So the team metrics are like basically the same with and without Dobbins last year. Other than like the pass rate over expected and the fact that Bo Nix got better. I think that's really interesting because now that they added Jalen Waddle, do they want to lean into that more, especially as Bo Nix is becoming more in command of that offense? I think that they might. Kind of interested in that. I think Bo Nix might actually be a really good pick in leagues right now. There was another report, Bears running back room expectations by Zach Pearson. DeAndre Swift, lead back, Kyle Monunga is still splitting, getting a lot of the bruising work. So short yardage, he'll do between the tackles type of stuff. DeAndre Swift, more pass game, more, outside types of runs. And then not much outside of the top two there. The only other team that leaned heavier into the pass when their main back got injured was the Saints last year. When Alvin Kamara got injured. So I think that's pretty interesting. That did also somewhat coincide with Tyler Shuck coming in and then taking over for Spencer Rattler. So maybe not necessarily the Saints are going to lean into the pass more, but just think it's really interesting that like the metrics didn't actually point to teams passing more once their lead back went down last year. They actually ran more, which was interesting to me. Sounds like Fernando Mendoza is probably not going to start week one. They're going to let him get used to everything, let the offensive line gel, all sorts of different stuff. They're content with having Kirk Cousins start early in the season. Mike McCarthy's playbook is roughly the same per Aaron Rodgers. Good to know. Derby Bernard is working with the route god. He's in a wide receiver 3 battle to start the year with Roman Wilson. I expect him to win that eventually. This article basically confirms that exact same thing, but they might not be in 11 personnel very much, or as much as you would want for the Steelers. So that wide receiver 3 role could be less valuable, but I do think Bernard could win that job as season goes on. Brian Thomas was mentioned again in players who will be even better in 2026 for the Jaguars by John Shipley. Again, that's opinion based, but he did mention like a little bit about his role again, which I think is interesting and keeps pointing to him being more of like a deep threat. But the quote was, with Thomas healthy and now no longer going to be shoehorned into a role over the middle of the field, he should be expected to top his figures from last season based on that context alone. So he's not shoehorned into the middle of the field, again, pointing to him being more of a downfield threat. So I am still pretty worried about that. Still questions about Jalen Hurts and how he's going to adapt to this under center throwing over the middle of the field scheme. I'm pretty worried about his prospects for this season as well. He's not going to get benched, but I do think that this is a very big prove it year for him. And I personally am not a Jalen Hurts believer in terms of being like a really strong throwing quarterback. So we'll see how that works out. Article in The Athletic this morning was talking about the most intriguing additions for all the different teams this year. I didn't get to all of them yet because I want to sit down and actually analyze what that means when they're saying like, hey, Denzel Boston, hey, Brad Idzik, all sorts of stuff like that. But Denzel Boston was mentioned for the Browns. It said the article actually said that they strongly considered him 15 picks earlier in the first round, where they took KC Conception. So I think that's really interesting. That means that they believe in him as a first round talent. And then in spring, he was really incredible for them, won their like spring MVP or what have you, based off all the beat reporters. So I think that he might actually end up playing more than Casey Conception because they view him as the outside receiver, which in 2 wide receiver sets, like that'll be him. So the other one underrated change for the Panthers, Brad Idzik is taking over as a play caller for them in 2026, taking over from Dave Canales, which I didn't actually 100% know in the past. I'm usually really in depth with all these reports and stuff, but for some reason that one like escaped me. I don't know what that means. I'm a little bit worried, but so he's supposed to put his own stamp on things. I did research on Davis Webb. They're talking about the Broncos playing at a faster pace based off of that and maybe more tight ends being involved. I don't know on the Brad Idzik change, like what that necessarily means. So I'm going to do some research and follow up on that one. See if I can find any details on what they've changed. Drew Petzing was listed for the Lions as like the most influential change. They talked about what he brings in terms of creativity to the run game, and I believe that was from the Cardinals. I believe that was mainly a Clayton Adams thing because we showed that for the Cowboys in 2025 with him coming over as OC for the Cowboys. So I actually don't think that it's Petzing that created that like run game scheme. I don't know that it'll carry over to the Lions, but again, they have Jahmyr Gibbs. They have some improvements along the offensive line. It may not matter. More confirmation that David Montgomery is a 3-down back. They mention it directly in here. Houston views Montgomery as a legit 3-down back. And that's all for today. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any comments, leave comments. I review all the feedback. And if you want to DM me, feel free to DM me. I'm always open. Thank you, guys.